Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms, where we take complicated issues and we try to break them down Canadian to Canadian. Today, I have here with me Robert Bard. How are you doing, sir?
Excellent, thank you.
Robert, I came across you off of Twitter. You are the PPC candidate for Edmonton-Manning, and you apparently, I'm always fascinated with people who are in the military, that you have this like larger than life impression. That's what I have of you guys. So tell us about a little bit about yourself.
I was born in Ottawa. I was the youngest of five children, two brothers and two sisters. Kind of grew up it was more or less the projects, and I went to a French school my whole life. My mother raised us herself. My father had left before I was even born, and she raised us, no alimony, no child payments or nothing. She put herself through school, and then she got a job at Stats Canada for 20 years before she retired. I joined the military around 19 and went to CFB Cornwallis for basic training, which was the standard back then. From there, I did driver training in Borden, then went to the school in Kingston. I joined in as a lineman, so working with telecommunication, pole lines, fiber optics and stuff. I did my school in there, and that's also where I met my wife and my son. From there, we were posted all over Canada. We spent 6 years in Kingston, 8 years in Petawawa, another 8 years in Edmonton, where I did a tour in Afghanistan there. Went back to Kingston for 3 years, then back to Ottawa for 2 before I went IR, which is imposed restrictions. So I went without my wife back to Edmonton for a year because we didn't want to sell the house at the time. From there. That's where I got my commission to be a commissioned officer in the military. From that, I went back to Ottawa for a couple of years and then I went back to. Then we went back to Edmonton in 2016, and I spent my time there until I retired in 2023, just December. While I was in Edmonton that time too, I also went to Ukraine on a tour. So that's my military career in a nutshell.
It's very impressive.
Well, there's been a lot involved. Going from an enlisted person from a private all the way to retiring as a major is quite an achievement, I believe. And it's definitely given me a lot of perspective and a lot of different views from, it's a different world from the non-commissioned members to the officers' corps, right? You see, whereas as a lineman, I did my job, but as a commissioned officer, I was more involved in the management and executive functions of the units. So it's quite something.
Oh, tremendous. I was actually really excited to get you on because I've had Canadians of all stripes come on the show, and we talk about things, but never one in the military. And I have some really basic questions. So ultimately, I hear a lot in the news about how people are saying we're not spending enough on the military, we're spending too much, military this, that, we got problems. Can you give us a primer on, what the military not so much is, but what's its purpose? Is it just for fighting wars? Is it border defense, civilian responsibilities, as well as how does it fit into the government? Like, I understand they're under the executive, but I almost feel like the military has a slightly more separated position than, for example, Health Canada.
That's quite a question. So the military is basically, it's a volunteer service, right? It's not conscription. People aren't mandated to join the military. We volunteer to come in, and our job is defend our country, both internationally and domestically, right? And it's in the interest of the king, right? So in technical terms, we don't really answer to the government, supposedly. We answer to the Governor General and the King. But of course, the government in power, we end up doing, their interests, whatever they want us to do. And that can run from, again, overseas tours, like Ukraine. Currently, we're doing more training than anything else. In Afghanistan, we were doing some war fighting. But we also do a lot of things domestically, ice storms, the floods, and way back there was Oka. So it's whatever the government decides for us to do in the best interests and security of Canada. Anything they do requires an order in council. So orders and councils, they're brought up by politics, and the politicians, they bring it up and it goes to the Governor General for signatures for orders and councils. It doesn't have to be necessarily be discussed in Parliament, so it can bypass Parliament for orders and council. And orders and councils are also used to provide positions such as the generals. There'll be an order in council to give them their positions and powers. I don't know if you're looking for anything else on that one. I could probably talk more about it, but it's probably repetition.
Can you go into more detail? An order in council, is that the cabinet? What is that?
So yeah, it's I have to write that. Actually, I have to write that down to remind myself of it. So just as I got here, the Federal Order in Council is a statutory instrument by which the Governor General, the executive power of the Governor and Council, acting in the advice and consent of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada, expresses a decision. In practice, the Order in Councils are drafted by the Cabinet and formally approved by the Governor General. Orders in Council are not discussed by Parliament and do not require legislation by Parliament before they're implemented. And it would be kind of ridiculous to discuss all of the orders and councils in Canada. There's actually a web page that you can see all the orders and councils that have been done in history, and there's all kinds of, whether it be promoting generals, whether it be requesting aid to civil powers, it's all in there.
So you kind of you mentioned the King. So the military in Canada pretty much reports to the Governor General, and then the King. Who has the right to declare war in Canada?
It's not so much who can declare a war. It's more or less who's in charge of the military, right? Who has the authority to tell the military to go to war? And again, it's supposed to be through the Governor General. I think if you watch the National Citizen Inquiry with I can't remember her name, the lawyer who was representing the military members over the COVID issues, she mentioned that it's technically it's the Governor General and the King and that are in charge of the military, and that in a technical sense the King could overthrow the government using the military. Whether that would happen, I mean, typically whenever you have a royal ascension of something, whether it really makes it to the King or the Governor General just stamps it, what is the purpose? What is the King's role in reality with the decisions of Canada?
It's interesting stuff. These are things I never thought of, because I always think about, we're just so dominated by the U.S. So I always think, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the president has the ultimate authority over the military. But like once you mentioned you were deployed in Ukraine.
Yeah, in 2017.
Like, what was the chain of command? Obviously, you report directly to a Canadian citizen, but like, how high up does it have to go before it stops reporting to the government of Canada?
Well, I mean, in Ukraine, I mean, we were directly involved with CJOC, which is the Joint Operations Center, and that's where we stopped. But obviously, they go to the Chief Defense Staff, which goes up to the Minister of Defense, and then between the Governor General and the Prime Minister, they sit in on those things, right? And they'll make decisions in supposedly the best interest of Canada. I was involved in when I was part of CJOC for a bit, while in Ottawa. There was the big Ebola outbreak, and there was a lot of high-level discussions about how how they're going to do things, how they're going to evacuate people, and what's next. What are the possibilities in Canada?
All right. Another question I had, I kind of ran this by you a couple of years back. I think it was 2019. There was a CSIS report submitted to Parliament, and in there they were talking about the intelligence agencies and the military, and they were talking about national security threats. But what struck me was that about like a third or 2/3 of the document was about like LGBTQ, inclusivity, racism. Just go down the litany of these leftist terms. What's your impression? I don't want you to say anything disparaging about the Canadian military, but like, what's your impression of how it's been evolving in the last few years?
Yeah, I saw that. I saw a lot of the DEI was mentioned in there a lot on how they use DER for CSIS and stuff. For the military, I think I have to go back to the medical issues and what that does. I mean, the transgender issue. Well, first of all, just the transgender issue on its own in the military. When I was the deputy command officer of one of the units in Edmonton here, and I read the policies, I had to go to my command officer and say, look, it says I have to provide them a means of things, but it doesn't mean I have to necessarily let them go into the change rooms, for instance. I have to provide them time. So I told them, I said, I'm not going to allow transgender into the female washroom and potentially hurt the mental health of the women that work in the unit. And we're not just talking about military because we have a lot of civilian staff as well. So I said, well, they can use the bathroom that's designated for wheelchair access in the building. And when they have to go, and if they got a shower after physical fitness, then they can go home. We'll provide them the additional time to do that, come back to work. Right? I'm not going to allow them to go into the washrooms with females and do their stuff. Right? So I had to think about those, and I had to look within the policies. And the policies, I wouldn't say they're restrictive, but they make us think about these issues. When I look at medical, you have to think that while it's good for people to be retained in the military, right? People get hurt, and when they go through a process, the military eventually will say, or careers will say, well, this person doesn't meet the universality of service in the military anymore. So an example of that was they can't handle a weapon anymore, right? So that means they break universality of service, and they shouldn't be in the military. But the career system will say, okay, we can retain you for up to 3 years. So these people are now retained in the military. They can't do the job that they were hired to do, but they're doing other jobs. So what that means is that, chances are it means they can't go overseas. They may not be able to do domestic operations. They may not be able to do work that's physical in some cases, which means other people have to do their job, right? So all of a sudden, the members who are healthy, they have to go overseas more often. They have to go away from their families more often because certain people can't do it. So this means that they're away from their families. They can end up breaking themselves, right? Either mentally or physically. Plus they're away from their families. So now they could be at higher risks for divorces and stuff like that because of that. So when you look at medical retentions, and then when you look at transgenderism, if these people are taken, so once you identify yourself as transgender, you have to go to the mental health system right away. You tell your commanding officer, you go to mental health, and then whatever happens to them from there, it just happens. So if they're diagnosed or affirmed and said, here you go, now you're going to take hormones. Well, if you take a medication that might be prohibitive overseas, then you can't go overseas, right? And then there's the aspects of the pre and post surgeries if they go that far. You're probably going to be out for 2 years, if not more. And depending on the medical care that you require, if there's complications, could be even longer. So the transgender issues within the military I don't see them looking very good, especially if the healthier members have to compensate for the people who are unhealthy. And I think it's going to be very troubling. The military, the CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff already mentioned on the news that the military is hurting, right? They're hurting for the recruiting, equipment, and then of course the sexual harassment issues that are going on. And that's the external view of the military, right? Everybody sees that because that's what's big in there. But when you look internally, there's a lot of little other problems that are going on in the military. It might be outside of what you're talking about, but if we talk about how the military is hurting, then these issues really mean how the military has done a lot of work on surveys to say how can we improve the military or sexual harassment issues in the military. And while they put out time and money for this, they don't address all the other issues. Because if I ask you how can the military improve, if you don't have a history, if you don't understand how it used to be, how good it used to be before, then how can you look at it now and say, this is how I want to improve it? In the 80s and 90s, yeah, there was still sexual harassment and issues going on, but we were a full military, and there were always people waiting to come in. What's the difference between then and now? There are some issues. One of it is we used to do everything, right? When you move from base to base, the military used to take care of you. So we had clerks who took care of the moves, who moved us from one place to another place. And everything was done quickly. Now we have the Brookfield relocation, who you hear nothing but problems with for our soldiers. They have to make a phone call to Brookfield, and when they have a question, and most of the times they're being told, well, you can go look in the manual, but they don't tell them where to look. So it's nothing but problems. And then there's the problems of, that's my next point, military housing. Right? We used to provide housing at a reasonable rate. They were well taken care of. The base commander of each base took care of the military housings on each base. Now we have Canadian Forces Housing Association, a very large organization that has a lot of executives that they pay, and the houses have deteriorated terribly. I had a member who had moved from Vancouver to Edmonton, and because of the move, he lost $125,000 of his home equity from his house. So he had a child with learning disabilities, severe ones, and a father who needed attention as well. So the housing association put him into a military housing that he had no say of. They made him sign a waiver saying that this basement floods, by the way, and we're not liable. But they only got him to sign that when he was on the ground, so he had no say on whether he had to take it, because he had just arrived on the base, so he had nowhere else to go. So making them sign stuff under duress is just terrible. We had to fight for him to get a place that he could take care of his child and his father, but we shouldn't have had to do that but that's because CFHA is a different organization. It's no longer under the base commanders. We used to have schools on the bases. So when you went from school to school, from province to province, your child had primarily the same type of education in an area where they had like-minded children. We don't have that anymore. It's either the schools have closed down or they've been handed over to the school boards, So now we have children going from province to province with different education types, requirements, and it does cause some issues. Socially, we used to take care of each other. So if somebody was having problems, the society within a base would help out other people. Now we have the MFRC, which is the Military Family Resource Center. And primarily they're seen as a big babysitting service, but it's not necessarily the case. They have a lot of services, but but in order to stay profitable, you might say, or in order not to lose a bunch of money, I was told that they actually provide like daycare. They'll actually have other people, civilians, who will now come in and pay for their services. So if a military person wants that service now, they may be full. So they can't be helped on their own base. The Canix, right? The Canix is basically a store on each base. It's through the Canadian Forces Morale and Welfare. And it used to be a place where you could go to get good deals on stuff, TVs, anything like that. It's like it's a very small mall. And again, you used to be able to go there to get the stuff. They had plans for loans and stuff like that, and it used to be pretty good. But now it was taken over by a corporation, and now they don't provide very good prices or any kind of really great products all the time. And to know how bad this gets for loans, there was a message that had come out a while back saying that they were providing loans for tattoos. So nothing says more like you think you should spend responsibly than saying, I'm going to get a loan for a tattoo. And they allowed for this. And it's terrible. The other part is the drinking messes. So each base has a mess, and these messes are for non-commissioned members or for officers, and there's a senior one for senior non-commissioned members. And per policy in the military, we have to belong to it, so we have to pay into it. So an officer's mess, for instance, I have to pay $30 a month, right? On the base. Now these messes used to basically kind of take care of their own, and they provided, you go in and you can get cheaper drinks, and they'd have activities and stuff that goes on. Now those activities still happen, but they've said, well, according to for some reason they said we need to bring the cost of a beer or drinks to the same as downtown, even though we pay into those messes ourselves. So it's no longer a factor to go down. So instead of living on the base and going to a mess, it's not as worthwhile because you can go downtown as well. It's but it takes away from the military being a distinct society themselves and working together and knowing each other properly in order to protect Canada, right? Like-minded people talking and discussing stuff. So we've fallen away from a lot of those issues. But again, back in the 80s and 90s, there were also all kinds of problems which still exist now, right? One of those issues is accountability. And not all officers are like this, but I had a young man who worked with me, and his wife she was pregnant. So while she was pregnant, she went on maternity leave, and the unit decided to say, we're going to bring you in and we're going to promote you. You were private, we're going to promote you to corporal. Excellent, nice thing to do. So they brought her in, they promoted her. She went back on her maternity leave. During that time, she got pregnant again. She had to stay on maternity leave. So after a while, a few years down the road, they did an audit on her pay. And they came back and said, hey, you were not entitled to be promoted to corporal while you were on maternity leave. So you have to back pay, I think it was $12,000+.
Jeez.
So she had to go through a grievance system which is part of the military, which is great. That part's fine. But the fact that she had to go through that, and it took some time to do it was easily a year or two to go through the grievance process. And thankfully, the chief of defense staff at the time called her up directly and said, yeah, this is ridiculous. You're not going to pay any money back. The problem is the accountability of the people who were there at the time, who have moved on since then, right? So in the unit, there was a clerk, a chief clerk, then there were troop officers, adjutants, warrant officers, chief warrant officers, and the commanding officer of the unit. All of them should have seen that in policy to say you couldn't have been promoted. So instead, this caused that person and her husband the pressures of thinking we're going to have to pay back $12,000+, right, on a corporal's pay. So, but there's no accountability for the officers who make these decisions, right? They've moved on, they've gotten promoted, and nobody ever goes back to them and says, you made the decision, maybe we should rethink what you're doing, right? And understanding that mistakes will happen. But that's why we have specialists in administration to look at these things. So you asked me how the military is doing. The military is doing fine, with the exception that we don't have enough people, we don't have equipment. Which equipment will take? You can look at another story is the unit that I had left. The reserves were having trouble having vehicles, and typically any kind of contract through the federal government is going to take up to 10 years to make a procurement of these vehicles. The commander of the division here had to go out and buy them himself to give to the reservists to be able to do their job. These are all kinds of issues that happen within the military, and they shouldn't. Some of it's due to bureaucracy, policies that need to be ratified, and other reasons are people who there may not be enough people, right? If something sits on somebody's desk for a while and then it has to go somewhere else, well, it delays the process completely. I don't see the military doing very well right now, but if they wanted the numbers, they need to fix how they take care of their people, and not just things like, oh, we're gonna change how you can wear your hair and stuff like that. I've heard it from several people who said, well, if do we really want people in the military that have the choice of doing color in their hair a different color? And of course, when the policy came out, we had people who abuse and push policies, right? And it's natural. It's human nature that people will push the boundaries of things. But as soon as the policy came out, there was already complaints about people saying, oh, we have to, they came back and they had actually a rainbow hair in the military. Okay. And the sergeant majors, who are the master warrant officer, chief warrant officers of the Canadian Forces, have to instill discipline on this. And it's becoming difficult for them, and where their jobs are. It's difficult. It's difficult for them. If I said enough?
Well, that was a very comprehensive response. Now I don't know where to go. I guess rather than talking about every issue you pointed out, tell me, in your opinion, why has this happened? I'll give you some examples. Is this legislators passing laws without understanding the military? Is this military brass that's acting selfishly to increase their own salaries? Is it corporations somehow moving in? What is it?
I'm not really sure. I know that it's government pushing their policies, diversity policies. Years ago, there was a policy in the military that the females had to take up 25% of all the military numbers. some occupations never made that. I know mine as a lineman never made 25% because it's a heavy physical, and because of the nature of our work, we're away from home. So I actually did have a young lady who was with us, and she was a good line person, but she ended up leaving because she couldn't have a relationship because she was gone all the time, and men didn't want to wait for her, right? So she changed occupations. But we change. The government has jumped in and made a lot of changes and forced it. And again, I report to the NCI report from the lawyer who's there. She talked about how when they pushed the mandates for vaccines onto people, the previous chief of defense staffs prior to this current one refused to implement them. And whether it's coincidence or not, they were found there was a sexual misconduct issues that appeared. So it's hard to think that, is there pressure going on from the government to do this? And it can be done through forms of financing, right? The military was told we have to give back $1 million prior to this fiscal year, so the government can use as they want. Or is it just, our military? I don't see it being our military. I mean, when you look at a general, they got in probably close to when I got in. And I got in '86. But so they got in probably in the 90s prior to 2000 to be a general, to have enough time in. And so they know what the forces was before. So for them to say, we have to change and we're going to include transgenderism and DEI into this, they would have probably had to been pressured to push it, I think. Even one of my commanders, he was asked that question during a talk. And they talked about, is this type of people we want in the military, the people who would, have piercings and change their hair color and get tattoos on their face. And he said, well, this is a military that this is part of the pendulum. And the pendulum swung the other way, and it's got to come back to normal eventually once they figure it out, what harm they're doing, right?
So you're in Alberta, I'm in BC. Here in BC, there's a transformation going on. Essentially, power is moving from the municipalities to the province. There's mandatory zoning requirements now. So there's minimum zoning. If you're this close to the subway, the province says you can't build a single unit home. You have to build like 30 stories. In Alberta, you have the Land Stewardship Act. I think it's Bill 36. It's sort of the same thing. The Alberta government can come in and can do anything, including confiscating your land without compensation, without recourse through the courts. So I see this drift of power from the people to the governments. I'm listening to you. It sounds like the military is almost like a government within the government, or it's got its own culture. Is this also influencing the military, where power is moving away from, for example, the base commander to who knows where?
Well, that's been happening a lot. Like all the things that I mentioned before about, the housing, the militaries, the moves and all that's been moving away from the base commanders and being given over. And, some might say, yeah, it's good, and some might say it's bad. I mean, to me, for a base commander to be able to look after his people on a base and not have to go to the third organization to fight for something that should have happened, I think it's terrible that it happens that way. The person that I mentioned about the military housing, losing 125,000, he lost his grievance, and he had to reapply it to the final authority. And it's ridiculous. He served his country. He had a place to stay in. They moved him, and he lost all that money. And then we put him in a terrible PMQ. And then the base commander, from the unit all the way to the base commander, we have to fight for him to get a good place to stay through a different organization that is kind of federal, but runs on their own. there's no, yeah, there's no personality, there's no personable relationship. You know, if I'm arguing with a guy who's in Ottawa to try to understand what my guy is going through, I don't think they're getting it.
Yeah, I can see that from Ottawa. I'll ask the question in a different way. I don't want to press you too much, but with the provinces, what's happened is we have people who have gotten into the government, into the legislature, that have got it into their head that it's better, you know, they're smarter, they can do things better, every power should be in their hands. And they have the power of the legislature so that they can actually change the rules. And that's what's happening. They're changing the rules to implement their vision for whatever, provincial control. What's the counterpart of that in the military? Like, who is it that has that power to redesign the military in this image? If you know.
Well, the Chief of Defense Staff is the person who can make the changes. He can order the changes to happen. But again, he's pressured by the government to follow a certain route sometimes. And the thing is, he can go against it. He can say, no, we're not doing that. They can eventually appoint him elsewhere. Yeah, they can replace him, but it'll take it, and they can do it almost any time. I don't think there's a guideline to say that the Chief of Defense Staff stays in power indefinitely. It's at the whim of the government. Well, it's at the whim of the Governor General. The Minister of National Defense is the person who will give the recommendations to the Governor General, and then the Governor General appoints them. I mean,
who is the Chief of Defense Staff? Is that an appointed position?
Well, yeah, it's basically you're appointed the position and promoted into it. And again, it's the Governor General that is the person who does it. So
yeah, like as you can tell, I'm struggling here because I have no knowledge of how the military works. Is it completely a closed system, the military? So yes, the Governor General can interfere, but typically the military is a self-contained unit, or is it the executive, the government can come in and say, no, you're not, the base commander is not going to be in charge of housing anymore. We're going to give it to this corporation.
Well, I think that's the government doing that because they're looking at the budgets, at the budgetary issues. So yeah, the government would be in charge of that part for policy's sake, right? I mean, Brookfield Services is not just for the military; it's for the RCMP as well, right? So they will. So the government decides that we're going to put out a contract to Brookfield, and they're going to now be in charge of everything. And that's through the finance minister, I imagine.
I guess it's pretty alarming that at all levels government's doing this.
Well, yeah. Well, same with the housing. The Canadian Forces Housing Association is the same idea, right? Individual bases were in charge of their own. They had their own people who repaired the PMQ, the military quarters. They took care of them. They took care of roads and grounds, and I'm not sure how the rent basically came off our pays directly, right? So once the Canadian Forces Housing Association took over, they still took money directly out of our pay, and we have no say. There's no holdback of rent on these federal lands. So if they're not doing something, so it takes them forever. Here's an example. When I moved in 2000 to Edmonton, we were having a house built, so we stayed in the military quarters, and we were there. And in November, we had kind of complained that it's a little chilly. It gets a little chilly in because we had a bay window in the front, right, in the front of our house. And so they came to us and said, okay, we have a large contract, and we're going to replace all the bay windows. But they sent me this notification in November that they were going to do it by the end of November. So I would expect that in December, they're going to remove my window in Edmonton in order to replace the window, but I have to pay for all the heat that's going out the window, right? I had to refuse it and said, this is just ridiculous. Just because you get a low-cost bid to do this in November because the window companies don't have any work to do, it doesn't mean that I'm going to do this. It just doesn't make any sense. You're doing this to what? To people with children in the house, and it's just crazy. So I had to actually write a letter and say, no, we're not doing this. Thankfully, I moved into our new house, our first house actually, and just before Christmas. So but other people may not have had that. I mean, I was a sergeant at the time, but I couldn't imagine if I was a young corporal having to deal with them and say, no, I don't want this.
What about another one that I've heard is, you and I talked about this, was pensions. I've heard a lot of soldiers, they say that they're not going to get their pensions. And how does that work? If the government has a contract with you that they're going to give you your pension, how could they withhold that pension? What do they mean?
Well, were they talking about regular pensions from the Canadian Forces or medical pensions? Do you? I
don't know. Let's start there. Like, do military personnel receive a special category of a pension?
Well, I'm currently waiting for my pension. Right, I spent 37 plus years in the military, so I'm waiting for. It's been about 3 days. I'm waiting for the pension to come through. They mentioned it should take 6 weeks, maybe. But when you're talking about a medical pension, right? So person would have identified while they're in the military, going to the military hospitals, that they've injured themselves, and it's on record. And when they release from the military, it would be identified that they're entitled to a medical pension. And this would happen in different ways that I mentioned before, they wouldn't make universality of service anymore because because they can't do things like hold a rifle anymore or something like that. So they would go through Director of Military Careers, and Director of Military Careers says, yeah, you don't meet universality of service. You can either be retained for 3 years or you release, but as of this date, you are released. And if the member decides just to release, then it would be hopeful that it would be quick and easy. However, if that was the case, then there wouldn't be a lawsuit on for 330,000 military members who either took years to get their pension or the miscalculation of the pension. And that was currently in court, or is just finishing in court. Then there's the part about what happens if I release from the military and I go back and say, I'm hurt, I deserve a military pension. Then they have to go back to the military records and see when their injuries were attributed to, if they were attributed to the military themselves. So that on its own, if you do it after you release from the military, it's going to take a lot longer. So people being worried about not getting their pension, especially in the time frame where they don't have a job and they're waiting for the pension to come in, that could be difficult.
Okay. Here's another novice question from me. What about justice? Like, do you guys have your own military court system?
Yeah, it's been revamped a lot. Summary investigations and stuff are done. Somebody breaks the rules, and they'll go through an investigation that's done. Either they're small ones and they're done internally to the units, or they're bigger problems and they're done to the military police. It's the system's changing a lot where they have the victim services now. So if it's no longer where they just charged somebody and that was it and they just left it. Now you have to include the victims of whatever was done. So if somebody was injured, harmed, harassed, or whatever, and somebody's being charged, then they have to talk to the victim, and the victim gets to say their issues. So it's changed in some good ways. There are still all kinds of issues where people might abuse that. But you'd hope that through the commanding officers and the people who are conducting these charges, that they will sort out the issues. But it's quite.
It's kind of fascinating. It's like the military it has a semi-sovereign status. Like,
yeah,
is that accurate?
Yeah, you might say that. I mean, you have to remember that we have to be ready to place the soldiers have to be ready to put themselves in harm's way, because their superiors have ordered them to put themselves in harm's way for a specific reason. And so there's an amount of discipline that needs to be there. We have to follow rules. We have all kinds of rules over and above what the civilian world would have, right? We have defense administrative orders and a large amount of things. So in order to, if we were to give that to the civilian world, they would just throw them out the doors, right? What happens when somebody doesn't show up to work all the time, on time, right? Is there a requirement? What if you refuse to do your job for a specific reason? Well, there's a mechanism involved in there to say, okay, well, you're not doing your job, why, and stuff like that. And if the reasons through an investigation that's done by the unit, if they say, well, your reasons aren't valid, then it can go to a charge. But there's a lot of charges are pretty well I would say last choice to happen, because there's recorded warnings. There's all kinds of warnings that are involved to go prior to get to the stage where you're going to charge somebody.
Do you guys also have your own? If you have military courts and police, do you have a military jail?
We do. There's a lot of the police forces have. They have like they might have cells, but if you do something significant amount, then there is actually a federal jail here in Edmonton. Actually, is where it is, and again, you have to be fairly significant. I don't think it's had anybody in that jail for a couple of years actually, but it does exist, and it's not pretty. There's an actual course that the military police have to take to administer people in that jail, and it's not like jail where you'd have it here in the civilian world. When I was at the school in Kingston in 2007, I was the duty officer for the base, and I had to go and see. It was funny because I had to go and see a soldier that was in jail at the time, and they were administering him. And unfortunately, it was around December, and his last name was Santa, so it was always a joke that they put Santa in jail. But yeah, he was there, and he had coveralls, and basically you go from one line to another and say, "Sir, may I move to the next line?" and "Sir, may," and continue on. And yeah, I actually saw him scrubbing the walls with something. Well, it was bigger than a toothbrush, but it wasn't gigantic. So they keep him busy, and and it's not like you would see in the civilian world.
All right. Okay, shifting gears. Here's current events. What's your view? I'll share my view first, so you don't feel like I'm putting you on the spot. But I'm going to ask you, what's your view on the Israel-Palestine conflict? I always tell people, I think this is an attack on national sovereignty. I'm not defending Israel if they're overreacting and slaughtering hundreds of thousands of people, but I just think that the UN wants final say as to whether or not people can go to war, because governments love to grow. What's your thought on what's going on there?
Well, it's always terrible to see what's happening. it's a war, right? I mean, and as much as people don't, want to look at the different sides, it's a war. Somebody declared war on somebody else, and that's just what happens. And now they're, as much as Canada was involved in Afghanistan, they're taking out the enemy. If, as for the United Nations, yeah, you're right. The United Nations should not be involved in declaring that who should and shouldn't go to war. I always said that people sitting in their chairs back at home, looking at what's going on, are not there. They don't see what's going on. They don't know what's happening on either side, but they have an opinion for it. And it's definitely, if our politicians should not be given over any kind of power to an unelected body of persons for whatever reason, whether it be war, finances, or anything, or medical. If our politicians can't do the job and make those decisions on our own with our own information, then they shouldn't be there.
Good answer. Well, I got you here. You're a military guy. What's your view on like proportionality? Like, it's a hot topic right now because we got 1,400 people in Israel got slaughtered, and then now I don't know, however 30,000 people are dying. Like, when does proportionality, in your opinion, kick in? Is it subjective?
Well, when does it happen with any war? I mean, does any war in the past looked at proportionality and said, this is how it needs to, we can only do this much? No, you fight until you sort out the issue. And in this case, it's Hamas, right? If Hamas is acting illegally in accordance to, UN contraventions, like if they're putting civilians in harm's way, then they need to be tried for that. If Israel is doing too much and they're targeting civilians, which doesn't seem to be the case, then they should meet the same fate. They need to be adjusted. But it's hard to say that sitting back in the chairs that that this is how I think what they should be doing. Again, we're not there. We're not going through the devastation that's happening on either side. What we should be concentrating is what's happening in Canada, and to ensure that we start sorting out the issues here, rather than trying to sort out the issues there.
Yeah, I agree 100%. As bad as this is, whatever is, the wars are always bad. They're always bad, but this just has nothing to do with us. And I'm finding myself, I feel like I'm turning into a bad person because I'm taking a selfish approach. I just say, does supporting Israel, does it increase our freedoms in Canada or does it decrease? Like, that's the only way I think now. So yeah. Maybe I'm going to hell. I don't know.
No. I mean, we all look at things, and again, we always want to look and say, hey, how can I help people? How can I help the others, people outside of the country? But in the end, you can't. And protesting, doing protests, mass protests, just to say I'm for or against Palestine or Hamas or Israel, it doesn't help either side here in Canada. Yeah, it might bring your views out, but what are you doing? You're protesting, and you're in the way of normal working Canadians when you should be in front of Parliament building doing it. You want your politicians to do something? Well, go talk to your politicians. Don't interfere with normal Canadian activity because you don't like what's going on across the world, because the normal Canadian can't do anything.
I wanted to go back to something you said at the beginning. You said you had kind of difficult or a rough upbringing as a child. How did that impact your decision, your life, but your decision to go in the military?
Well, I was lucky enough actually that I actually joined Air Cadets when I was 14. So I had a bit of a background with military-ish kind of place, right? And and my mother was fully in supportive of it, and it was just a normal progression for me to say, yeah, I'm going to join the military. So it wasn't a tough decision. It didn't have to think about it much, and it was very when I went through it was very quick. I think it was like less than 6 months. Actually, way less. I think it was closer to 3 months from the time I put an application into to the time where they took me in. So no, it was the upbringing itself. Like nobody in my family other than myself had been in the military, so it wasn't a grave decision. I was happy to do it, and I enjoyed for the most part. I enjoyed my military career. It was there was a lot of hardships as well, but there was a lot of positive stuff. I have to thank my wife for 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 helping my mental sanity sometimes.
So, I guess we're getting to the end of the show. Robert, you're running for the PPC in Edmonton-Manning. Why did you decide to do it? Because it's not like you're not doing it for fame or fortune. What was your reason?
Yeah, well, it was just I was coming to the end of my career in the military, and it's just basically seeing things that are happening, right? Whether it was I was all for COVID and at the beginning of this, and then things started coming out, and things just didn't start making sense, and I had the choice of saying, okay, I'm going to retire and just sit on my butt and do my own thing, or I could try to make changes and try to make things better. So that's what I decided to do, and and thankfully with the support of my wife, she's been there behind me, helping me out and put me through the ringer, asking me questions and everything.
How long did it take you was this just like a snap decision you made, or did you have to work up the courage over months,
No,
years?
no, well, yeah, I guess I did have to work up the courage of saying, who am I to do this? It's not like I don't have a university degree or anything like that. I went through the military. I worked hard. I did my job, and then I commissioned, and then I had to say, yeah, well, no, I joined the military. I worked hard, and I commissioned. Yeah, I do deserve to go there. What am I missing for not being a politician, an MP? Okay, I don't have a good degree, but degrees nowadays are not meaning the same thing they used to. And so the life experience that I have, being that I started from the bottom up and worked my way up, means that I've gained that crystallized knowledge, you might say, and just I think I have a better thought process than somebody who's gone through their life as a politician, who's never worked at the lower levels as a crew member, and then that's what I hope I never forget, where I came from. That's the most important part.
When you talk to people in your riding, but I just considered one monolith, Canadians now. When you talk to Canadians, like what are the major problems they're facing? What are they concerned about?
Well, I haven't had the chance to really talk to anybody in the riding yet, but that was my plan for the new year, to start calling the members in my riding. But hearing other things, everybody always, the military people, for instance, everybody's complaining about costs of living. I haven't heard most of the immigration issues that I've heard are dealing with, well, fears of immigration in the military. The idea that immigration people can join the military with the hope of getting a faster citizenship was entered. That's a concern for people. Other than that, people complain about the transgenderism and what's going on in the world with female sports and bathrooms. There's a lot of things to work on. There's a lot of things to address.
We were going to get into immigration, but I feel like that's another hour. But I'm Iranian, and I always I'm always the odd one out because Iranians are very, very left of center, and I'm kind of way over here on my own on an island on the right. So I don't really get invited to dinner parties. But lately, whenever I do go to dinner parties, I've noticed that they are starting to realize that things are really bad. So taxes are one. A lot of people are leaving the country because of taxes or just dropping out of the workforce. Mothers have been concerned about transgenderism. It's not a hatred. It's a fear for their children. They don't know how to react to it. Immigration is a bit of a mixed bag because what alarms me, and I'm going to be honest about this, and I'll probably lose every Iranian voter, but when they look at immigration, they don't see it as whether it helps the country or hurts the country. They see it as, can I get my, second cousin removed over here? I'm like, you can't think like that, but I don't know. It's hard to get through. But that's my input on that. But I didn't know that you could fast track through the military as an immigrant.
Well, that just started about a year ago. They started allowing immigrants to come in and join the military with the potential to fast track. Now, I don't know how that works. I mean, when you join the military, you have to do security clearance. Depending on the occupation you go in, and most of them, they're more than enhanced reliability, right? Because you're dealing with either people's information or with equipment. So I don't know how it'll work. But immigration is definitely a huge issue, and it's never about stopping people from coming. It's about slowing down so we can take care of the people who are here first, and then doing things responsibly. And if that means that we just have to have a different policy in place to say, okay, you want to bring somebody over, we can do a visit visa. Okay, as long as we have to look at Canadians that are here and make sure that they're not just taking away the resources from Canadians who are here. So you come over, make sure that the people who are sponsoring you can take care of you here without taking a ton of resources. And it's a visit. Like I said, my neighbors are doing that. Yeah, their parents coming down for 2 years. They take care of. They have resources to take care of them. And that should be sufficient to start. Yes, they don't get full immigration right away, but currently the immigration program, whether it be lotteries or whatever else that changed to it, needs to be fixed. It needs to be what Canadians need to come into the country, not what everybody wants. Not just everybody wants to come in. Right? If we don't take care of ourselves, how can we help other people?
We've our riding here, our EDA, the PPC EDA, we've looked at immigration quite closely the last few months. And I guess there's been three major, let's call them inflection points. The most recent one is the Compact for Migration, where Trudeau just went like pedal to the metal. We had 1.02 million in 2022 and 1.2 million last year. That's like next level. Before that, it was Mulroney in '91, where he announced from the rooftops, we're gonna play fire with fire, and we're gonna play by the Liberals' rules and just pander to votes. And then it took off. I think it was before that. It was 71 with the Immigration Act under Pierre Elliott Trudeau. I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but he's the one that said you no longer have to prove that when you come here you're going to have employment. That's just not required anymore. Like these little minor changes in law, they have huge impacts because you're basically saying, come over with absolutely no recourse to take care of yourself.
Well, they've just changed did they just change the requirements about money, about having money to come here? Well, that's only for students. But that's still an issue, right? If they lower the requirements to come in, then we're going to have issues, right? That means they take certain resources, but it doesn't even stop the refugee statuses that are coming in, people who come in illegally, right? Those are all issues that cause trouble, and it's hard to say that we all want to help people, and we all say that if somebody comes in and says, yeah, I'm a victim of my country and I'm asking for status here, nobody wants to say no. But it comes down to what does that do to us, right? If we can't take care of ourselves, if we're in a mess because of mass immigration, how can we help other people? It just doesn't make sense. So it's not about stopping it, it's about controlling it, bringing in the people who we want to come in. If that is tradespeople, then great. We just have to make sure that that we invest in them then to make sure that their standards in the trades are the same as ours, right? I wouldn't want to have somebody come in to be he's a carpenter, he comes in and starts building houses, but he doesn't follow our regulations on how to build houses as a carpenter. We have to invest in them to make sure they have the same standards.
I always I tell people, like, we've passed the stage of clown world. We're entering like clown galaxy or clown universe. So you have 3,000 terminated nurses in BC, and BC is the only province that's not letting them go back to work. But the healthcare system's imploding, so they're going to bring in healthcare workers from abroad. Yeah. And that is so far removed from, I don't even, it's not sane anymore. Like, we're just making these irrational decisions. I don't know, maybe it's virtue signaling, like, children of God, we got to help them. But what about charity at home?
Well, if the government creates a scenario that disrupts places, and they have a back thought about privatization for corporations, then this makes sense, doesn't it? Let's make a system that's failing, that's gonna fail, and then let's say privatization will take care of it. And it is heading that direction. Eventually they'll give it over to corporations who will do it. But again, the government's doing themselves to pander to corporations.
It's the I know people don't like to use the word fascism, so you could call it public-private partnerships or corporatism. It's turning into like a mesh of the government, the top 3 companies in whatever sector, and the unions. And it's just this unholy union of those 3.
Yeah.
And they're no longer fulfilling the responsibilities they're supposed to.
Yeah. We give too much to corporations. We allow them to get away with too much stuff, and then we allow them to make decisions on their incorporated business that takes away their liability, and it's a big issue. When a company creates a product, do we tell them you have to figure out how that product is recycled? No, we just let them do the things, and we have to figure it out. So
I guess final question. What are your thoughts on? Sorry, what are your thoughts on how do we scale back government without having more government? Like, how do we do that?
How do you scale back government without having more government?
I mean, like, if government's the problem, and like, how do we do a constitutional amendment? Do we start getting judges in there that aren't deferring to the courts? Like, what do we do? Deferring to the government.
Well, it's an analysis on what is really needed. Do we need all these ministers? Do we need everything that they have in place to run the country? I mean, or are they effective in their jobs? Are they busy in their jobs, or do they just have like 1 or 2 hours of work to do a day, and then the rest of the time they're golfing or something? We have to look at what their jobs are and say, yeah, you don't need to do that. We can have somebody else. It's always amazing how we have a single point of failure in so many places. If you want to get something done, if somebody doesn't do that job, then that's a single point of failure, and things get held up. So if they're so busy that they can't get something done, there's nobody else that can do that job, or nobody else that can take up that specific job. I have a hard time believing that the government slows down or stops processes because somebody's not around. I think it's more job preservation than it is efficiency in government. Again, once you analyze a job and say, yeah, somebody else can do your job, or somebody else can double down to assist you with the job, I think is things to look at. In the military, it's very much that way. If somebody can't do the job, if the boss is gone, they take up that mantle and do that job. They don't get extra pay for it necessarily, but they, in order to keep things moving for the subordinates, they take up the job. Right? It's not just, nothing stops. And unfortunately, that's what we see in government.
I remember during the protesters surrounding the truckers in Ottawa, it was my understanding that the government they reached out to the military to ask if the military would be willing to intervene, and the military gave a hard no response. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, so there was an article in the National Post that the Ottawa Chief of Police actually mentioned that. I don't know whether the government itself, but I'm sure the question was posed. Usually, all these areas are always asked about, but the Chief of Police actually looked at it and said, hey, we may have to ask for aid to civil power from the military to come in and convoy. But funny enough, there was also an article in CTV News that mentioned that the military itself had received over 360 phone calls from the truckers themselves asking the military to intervene to stop the police, to help them protect them against the police. So that was always funny to read that stuff. I wouldn't have thought that, and if I didn't look it up, I never would have known. So that's good. But it would take an order of council for the government to do this in the first place. And I don't think it would be in the best interest for the government to do that. I mean, we all saw what happened, you may have read what happened in Oka years back, and what negative press that was for the military. This would be just as bad, if not worse. Not to mention the how thin the military is right now with current deployments and everything. And then there's what we can do, right? I mean, years back, we used to train for, when I was in Kingston, we trained if we got called in for the prison in Kingston, the penitentiary, and we used to do some training for that, but it was very basic. And so I don't know what the military would really have done better than the police had done in that area. And it's not like the military can come in with bullets in their rifles and start doing stuff. Even during the ice storm, our rules of engagement was that we couldn't, there was a lot of theft going on when we got called in, and we were told as rules of engagement we cannot fight them. And if they try to steal a generator, the most we could do was sit down on the generator, stop them from taking it. So So we're very limited with the rules of engagements that get presented to us. So I don't think the military would fare well with this, especially with the low numbers already. It would just deter more people to join the military, I think, if they knew that they would have to do this against their own in Canada. Yeah, it would not be pretty.
The whole time you were responding, I was laughing because I thought 360 people called the military saying, "Help us from the government."
Yeah, and I never would, like me, I would never even have thought of that to do that if I was there. But somebody, yeah, had the phone number to call the military, and they asked. What does that tell you? Right? They expect something to happen, and they must have the idea that the knowledge to know that the military technically doesn't answer to the government; they answer to the Governor General and the King. You would have to know that.
Yeah, maybe the truckers would have had better luck if they had called Buckingham Palace.
Maybe. But yeah, and where it goes with the Chief of Defense Staff, he's going to mention he's the one who does the analysis and well with his people to say, yeah, this is what we do, this is not what we do, and again he's going to look at, we're well over, it's not about just taking a bunch of people and throwing them in place and sorting out the problem from the trucker convoy. You have to bring support, you have to bring water, you have to bring, how you're going to feed them, and this is going to cost a whole lot of money, and they're going to want to take it out of the military budget, and the government's not going to want to reimburse them. So is that beneficial to the government, or to the military to do that? No, we can't afford it unless you give us tons more money. So yeah, it just didn't make any sense. Where are you going to house them, for instance, right? You bring all these people to Ottawa, where are you going to house them? So to do that just wouldn't have made administrative financial sense, and it certainly wouldn't have made good moral sense for the.
Well, I'm glad they made the decision that they made. All right, Robert, we're at the end of the episode. Do you have any final words of optimism for Canada?
Well, everything is fixable. It can be fixed. It just takes time. It takes the right people in place to do it. And on another note, I just want to make sure I say, like, I've had, I said a lot of things about the military today, and 37 plus years, I've had good times. I wouldn't want to disparage anybody from joining the military necessarily, because there's some good times in there. It just identifies the things to make it better, so that they can carry on, right? So yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I hope I answered all your questions, and hope we can talk again.
No, thank you very much for coming on and for tolerating my my ridiculously novice newbie questions. Military is not something I'm familiar with. So thank you very much, Robert, and best of luck with your candidacy and running in your riding. And we're just going to carry you just after the show as well.
Yep.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks.
Bye.